What's happening biologically when you are practicing meditation?
So of course, there's a lot of research on it and a lot of understandings, and quantum mechanics sheds a lot of light into it. But when we look at our physiology, and that's really the value of my book, The Survival Paradox, is that we are all wired to survive. Every cell in our body is wired and built to survive. It's what keeps us alive. And that's really the survival paradox. Because we are wired to survive initially in as an embryo, the survival expresses itself with proper embryogenesis, developing organs that are normal. But once we are out in the world, we start facing challenges and injuries. And part of our survival is to repair these injuries. So because we are built to survive innately, and as you mentioned already, our immediate response to survival is automated through the autonomic nervous system, through the sympathetic nervous system. And so the moment, it's a fraction of the second, we all experience it, right? We either go into a fighting mode, which drives the inflammatory process. So I'll start big and then I'll go into the cell, or we go into hiding, we run away, we isolate ourselves, we run away. Outside, we can run away. Inside, how do we run away? By shielding ourselves, by creating a coating, a lattice formation. It creates a microenvironment, a separate environment. And when cells in the body loses communication with each other because a certain cell, for a certain reason, either it has a toxic pesticides, or it has a toxic heavy metals, or the cell got nourished at the time of trauma and absorbed the energy of the trauma, the cell goes into survival mode. What is survival, Nathan? Survival is not accepting that everything that expresses itself will come to an end. That's the definition of survival. So the cell wants to survive. It creates a microenvironment. It starts nourishing itself in a different way than the body. It starts not listening to the body anymore because the body is telling the cell it's time to go into apoptosis. And what happened to this cell? It's called a cancer cell. That's really the definition of cancer. In my book, The Survival Paradox, I really treat cells as living beings with a personality, with a psychology. They really are, it's often, and I'm sure you've seen it, cancer patients where they have some lymph node or metastasis on the skin, you can see the cancer one day angry, more hard, more red, and one day more relaxed, more subdued. So this happens on the tumor level, it happens on the cellular level. So we have about, rounding upward a little bit, about 50 trillion cells, okay? Not million. Million times 1,000 is a billion, times 1,000 is a trillion, times 50. And each cell has close to 1 million reactions a second. So imagine 50 trillion cells, almost infinite number, 1 million reactions in a second, and we are still one person. It's truly a miracle.
And then, add to that, in each cell, right, 1 million reactions per second,
right,
50 trillion cells. And then in each cell, we have hundreds to thousands of what are now being considered microorganisms. We call them mitochondria, which also have their own separate DNA and functions that keep the cell alive, right? And they're a big part of those 1 million functions and processes that are happening every second.
I was just going to get to
it. It's just incredible. It's mind-blowing.
I was just going to actually get into the mitochondria. So the cell, in one level, is our most smallest identified self. It has a boundary, a membrane, just like we have a skin. It decides what comes in, what goes out. If the cell feels safe, if the cell feels quote unquote loved, if it feels what is loved, that the environment around it wants to take care of it, then we relax, we go into a parasympathetic mode. Now, I am describing right now an autonomic nervous system effect, but there is a biochemical effect that is driven by alarming survival proteins And the key one that I've researched for close to 30 years and made a lot of the discoveries about how to block it and what happens when you block it is called galectin-3. And I'll get to it a little bit later. It's fun when we have a lot of time to talk, so I don't have to rush. So now the cell feels safe, it's relaxed, it produces energy very efficiently. Meaning from one molecule of glucose, it can produce 36 molecules of ATP.
Right.
But if we go into a danger zone, into a survival mode, which is what cancer cell does and other conditions, we need to produce energy fast. So we skip the mitochondria, which I'll get to in a moment, and we produce energy through anaerobic glycolysis.
Yep.
Now we can produce 100 times more energy, very fast, but 5 to 6% efficiency. 2 ATPs compared to 18. Now, a cancer cell is in panic. A cancer cell doesn't recognize that it actually has oxygen, that it can actually use the mitochondria and oxidative phosphorylation. And so it produces through glycolysis in the presence of oxygen. And this is a Warburg effect. So one thing that is worthwhile for people, cancer patients or doctors, is to really ask the patient, what made your cancer, what made you not be able to take a deep breath? And you will get amazing stories. Like when I do like craniosacral, I just focus and I feel the tumor and I ask the patient the question. And it's very important not to tell the patient what you see. Okay, that's a tip for healers. We want to feel, oh, we are amazing. Oh, I can feel. No. You are taking the discovery away from the patient. You just guide them, because if the patient makes the discovery, they're opening a door to releasing the trauma, to what is called memory reconsolidation. They are building a new, a fresh experience. It has enormous healing power. Enormous healing power. So our job as healers is just to hold them, and let them get there. So when we're in safety, the cell knows that it can produce energy well. There's a molecule called AMPK, adenosine monophosphate kinase, gets upregulated. Also happens when we don't eat too much sugar, when we exercise, where insulin receptors are working well. And then something called mTOR1 system is downregulated, and something called hypoxia-inducing factor is shut down. The cell doesn't feel like it doesn't have oxygen. There's actually a factor in the cell that sets an alarm when it feels I don't have oxygen. Now, if we feel like we don't have oxygen, we activate an enzyme called PDK and pyruvate dehydrogenase kinase, which shuts down the main enzyme PDH, which allows the metabolite of glucose pyruvate to get into the mitochondria, again, hundreds of thousands of mitochondria, and produce energy properly. So when we go on ketogenic diet, when we go on intermittent fasting, when we don't eat too much glucose, we find sugar, when we exercise, when we meditate, we are shifting the cell into a normal metabolism. And kind of to close the circle, when we meditate, it can take longer because we are asking for a mind effect to percolate down all the way to the cell, compared to changing a diet where you just feed the cell with something else. But when we use meditation, we are getting to the substance, to the biochemistry through our essence, through our energy expression, and then through the substance. So we are working on all the levels of our being. And that's why the healing is so profound. And I know it from my own experience, how I would come out of this 6 to 8 to 10 weeks retreat. I would look 15 years younger. I would feel 15 years younger. Health problems I had just would dissipate away. And then as I got back into life, they slowly started, creeping back. And then there would be another retreat. So I'm really waiting to go back.
Thanks for listening to the Nathan Crane Podcast. If you found value in today's podcast, Please share it with others, subscribe to catch future episodes, and leave a rating and a review. For more information or to connect with Nathan, check him out online at www.nathancrane.com and follow him on Facebook and YouTube at Nathan Crane. Until next time, this has been the Nathan Crane Podcast.